and get through the content. Um, in case you're not sure what we're going to be talking about, we're going to be talking about search and some of the things around AI around that. Um, First, a little bit about myself. My name is Virgil Carroll. I'm the owner and principal human solutions architect at HighMonkey. I actually hail originally from the state of Alaska, and I've been celebrating 21 years, well over 21 years now of business since September, working in the field of web. I really look at, I've been doing this since 1998, so I've kind of been through everything and anything that's almost happened in our industry in that. And definitely anytime I talk, one of the things you're always going to notice is I'm a huge user experience person. So before we get started, a couple of logistics. First, one of my other associates, Joel Vaglin, is on the webinar as well, and he will be monitoring the question and answers area. So if you have any questions during my session, feel free to ask them, and you can just ask them by actually putting your question in there, and he'll let me know, and I'll either answer it during the session or I will wait to the end and answer those as well, because I can't quite see that stuff on the screen as well. Second, if you joined because you attended the HiEdWeb conference, I appreciate you joining, and thank you for taking the time, and apologize for not being able to be there in person, but sometimes things happen, and I had a sick kid at home. So let's go ahead and get started. Well, the first thing I want to say is one of the reasons we always talk about search is because of just really the nature of search in general and what happens in there. And I've actually been using this slide in presentations I've been doing probably for the last 15 or so years, because I think it really exemplifies why we have to talk about this topic in the first place. And it really is because from a user perspective, a visitor's perspective, people think, well, they ask a question and some kind of magic happens and a user gets an answer. And that kind of is one of our biggest problems right there, is that people don't really understand the complexity that goes behind search, what it takes to really make good search, and all the things in between that really makes that happen. What they do is they take their experience with search engines like Google, that has, buildings full of people that work on the search nonstop all the time and are always doing things, and they take that as a perspective as this is how the search should work anywhere. So if I'm really successful in Google or Bing or even large e-commerce systems like Amazon or something, it should always mean something to me. So why does this not occur a lot of times for us on our sites, whether it would be a college, a business, a government agency, whatever you might be? Why do we not tend to have that? Well, there's really a lot of different reasons that we tend to have bad search, but I thought up front I'd kind of share 5 of the reasons that I really see that we see bad searches most. And first and foremost, it's always about stuff. And a lot of times, whatever you're searching, whether it's your website or some type of other digital experience, or maybe an internal workplace, we just have too much stuff. And a lot of times the way sites grow is they grow organically. So we're adding content, but we're really never removing that content. And we see a lot of things where everybody's stuff is most important. It's elevated to the top, and pretty soon we had this hodgepodge mess of information and design and navigation and everything like that. And that all affects search on the same side too, is how search kind of understands what might be happening from that side. Another part of that we see a lot is that a lot of times people love PDFs, or they love having documents. We see this especially a lot in educational institutions and government agencies, where they tend to focus a lot of their effort onto the format that their people are most comfortable with, which is creating PDFs, attaching them to file or attaching them to web pages, and then trying to make that searchable. And really that can provide 2 different things. Number one is a lot of times we'll see our search results overridden by PDFs. But on the other side, sometimes what we see is that we see that that content kind of gets locked in there and people aren't able to find it as well. And a lot of times that has to do with organizations never really having sat down and created some type of content governance strategy to make that work. So another thing that we see a lot is we just don't really understand the way people are searching in the first place. We don't really understand it. I mean, if you were to be honest, how many of you really look at search analytics? But even if you do look at search analytics, do you look at what's important, or do you focus on, you know, things that are ancillary, like what is getting the most hits or something in your search? Well, that's important, but more so, we have to really understand out there what is not getting served, where are we failing in our searches, what words are not bringing up things, because from that standpoint it's not really about our successes, it's more about how we can turn our failures into successes from that side. And you really have to base it, you know, a lot of times when an organization sits down and even works with a highly powerful search engine, a lot of times they kind of bring in their own lens to the scenario, so they're kind of looking at it from their own little unique way of how they see these things, and not necessarily take into consideration how people outside really look at this stuff as well. So that usually comes to, typically in most scenarios, if we're doing some type of new site, or we're doing some type of site or digital relaunch of a particular entity, what we're tending to find a lot of times is that one of the things that organizations do is that they really keep search as kind of an afterthought. Otherwise, it's probably something that got brought up at the beginning of a project, but overall it really wasn't discussed again towards the end. So there was no it being part of your overall conceptual digital strategy and what you're trying to do. And this comes not only with the way that you create your content, but it comes with the way that you structure your site. It comes with what you're really hoping search is going to do for your organization once this new digital entity really releases and is available to consumers. And you have to look at that side and you have to really understand what that is. And it needs to be part of the process of building. We work with a lot of customers where we end up actually building search specific fields into their content management systems so that they can better curate that search results and the content they can serve to better, because they've spent time actually understanding their people and they've integrated it into their entire content development process. So the other thing that we're seeing more and more these days from a search standpoint that is really kind of visually impactful is the difference between what you see on a desktop and what you see on a mobile. And what we're seeing is that a lot of times searches are really built where we're kind of in this world of digital where we say mobile first. Search itself is kind of built more from the standpoint of desktop first. So otherwise, maybe you did the fancy little search box up in the top that you can click and it pulls down the little thing. But overall, the search experience, how you present things, whether you're using some type of faceted navigation to filter in that, we're kind of looking at search on mobile as an afterthought. And what we're finding more and more is that we're starting to be able to correlate through things like Google Analytics that searching through mobile is actually a more important experience than what it used to, because people, when they're going on a site that has hundreds and hundreds and thousands of pages on it, don't tend to have the patience naturally to navigate through things. Well, then you add mobile into the equation and those patients get a lot less. And so we really need to understand that desktop is not our only delivery of search, just like we look at for our site, and really consider what that mobile experience would be and how people are going to want it. Because, you know, if on the desktop you're providing, you know, when you hit search results, you're providing a title and then you're providing this really lengthy explanation, that's not going to be a good experience on a mobile where you might want to look at providing that title, but a much shorter explanation, getting much more directly to the point so that people can kind of move on. The other thing, and we're not going to talk about this extensively today, but something that you really need to start thinking about is the voice enablement, boy, that's a word, of search as well. in that. And so we're getting more and more where, yeah, maybe you're not going to add some kind of Alexa skill or something like that that's going to come along with it, but where voice search is becoming more and more important, that as we go to be a more hands-free environment, especially in the world of mobile, you know, states and organizations and countries all creating laws around where we can hold our phones, we're starting to move to a more voice first type interface when we're out and about and not just sitting in front of our desktops. And so part of that mobile first interface is really understanding that a lot of times when we do this voice recognition, it's going to be taking a lot of the language. So being able to pair that language with your results is going to be very, very important. And that. And then, of course, the last one, and why we wanted to kind of talk about artificial intelligence and search and really everything that goes into it in the first place is, you know, do you have the right tools? And no, I'm not in this session going to recommend the correct search engine for you, because that's not the purpose of this session. This session is to give you an idea of what is out there. But at the very end, we will talk a little bit about the tools that are available. And, you know, you can kind of look at that and do your own research on that side. But overall, most tools are chosen by their features, and I realize I have a spelling error there, so any English majors in here can call that out, and not the need. So otherwise, a lot of times we get really caught up in the bells and whistles, but what we never look at is, one, whether those bells and whistles are really going to help us as an organization, but two, do we actually have the internal capacity and understanding to implement those features really at the level where it is going to be helpful. And those are things you really have to look at from that side and really understand, because a lot of times we've bought search engines and we've invested in open source systems or that maybe give us the potential, but overall we do the most basic implementation because that's really not only what we understand, but it's also what we have the ability to do. So you really have to understand what your content is, how you're going to use it to really start to focus in on what you're going to use it for. So from that side, let's talk a little bit about how artificial intelligence, this general generic word, kind of brings into it in there. And that's really the key thing is artificial intelligence is kind of like almost every other marketing buzz phrase out there on the planet. It's overused, it's used to talk about a million different situations. And frankly, back when we used to talk about it years ago before it became part of the marketing dialect, it really was about creating some type of artificial intelligence that could understand the way people talk, do things the way people did it. It really was about something, but coming from the source of a computer, a mobile phone, or whatever. And now it's really turned into all this hodgepodge of different functionality. And this is what I think a lot of organizations especially get confused by, because it's very easy to get caught up in the bells and whistles and go like, oh my gosh, we're going to have an AI-driven search. So all we got to do is install it, let it crawl our content, and boy, search is just going to be amazing. Well, where there is some truth to that, overall, there's a lot of different moving pieces that fit into these, and understanding these different moving pieces is really kind of going to make it better or worse for you in understanding those ramifications. So probably, whoops, I think I skipped one. The first most common thing we hear about, I think, well, really the first two, natural language processing and machine learning. If you ever hear phrases out there in the world of search, these are probably the two phrases you've heard. Google has been doing natural language processing for a really long time, and it continues to get it. And the easiest way to think of it is when you can go there and write a sentence like, find a brewery near the office in there. You can write some kind of sentence, and Google has the ability, or any of these type of search engines really have the ability to parse that language out and actually understand the meaning of the different words. So find being a verb, brewery being a noun, what is the how of the sentence, what is the object of the sentence, and then actually being able to parse out noise words, which actually search engines have been able to do for a really long time. But overall, it's about understanding the intent of what somebody is trying to do and try to get them to the correct things. So through this kind of intelligent natural language processing, you're able to do this kind of stuff. And now where this is getting more and more built in or being some type of additional service on a lot of commercial-based search engines and even some of the open source tools out there, there are getting to be also this collection of other services like Lewis.ai, which is a Microsoft-based cognitive service, where you can actually do this and integrate it into your own searches that already exist and get it to be there. But overall, the reality is what we're finding more and more, especially on public websites and public digital entities, is we're seeing that people are actually using the same type of phraseology that they use on Google and Bing and all the major search engines, and they're using that on site searches as well. So if you're seeing that pattern, you're probably, your search engine just out of the box is not being very helpful with that, and you end up either having to do a lot of work on your own or a lot of different effort around there, or your search is frankly failing. But this is where natural language processing comes in. But it's not only just about understanding sentence structure, it's also even so much more. It's about speech recognition. So this type of cognitive services is what's going to really understand if somebody is using a voice-enabled search, that is going to do that. Now, often that's going to be handled by whatever voice assistance a person is using, whether it's Siri on or Hey Google or Alexa or Cortana, whatever it might be, that might be providing that interface. But overall, your search engine has to take that interface and be able to move it into its knowledgeable side and understand that. But it doesn't just stop there. As we get more in voice, and maybe you're one of those organizations that really want to enable your own voice search and bypass those services because some of the privacy issues with them and some of that right there, well, you got to understand that you're going to have to really look at investing something, because not only are we talking just speech and written word, but we're talking about the different dialects, the different phrasing people use, the different accents they have in voice, and all the different pieces there, even the different spelling they use for words. Now, these all play into this overarching piece that honestly, I probably could do a 4-hour presentation just on how you actually go through and look at natural language processing and all the different pieces with it. So it's not just simply a turn on and all of a sudden can say, I want to buy a car, and that's just going to give you the answer that you need. It's more about understanding it, because what if I say I want to buy a car, or I need to buy a car or something? All these things are very similar in nature. If I could relatively well speak another language, I probably would have done that. But and it all sounds different, it all works different, and all people are different. So this is really that effort to kind of take that and understand what it means. So building on top of natural language processing, we really look at the next piece that, again, if you probably hear about anything, this is probably the other thing that you hear the most, which is about machine learning. And machine learning really builds on natural language processing, because what machine learning really is they're kind of very similar in nature, and they're not necessarily things that you want to think as separate. They're just kind of separate concepts. And that is, now it's taking the semantics. So we go back to that sentence that we say, find a brewery near the office. The machine learning piece of that, the NLP piece of that is going to understand what is what in the words. The machine learning is say, okay, brewery, I have some context of a brewery. Office, I know that this person is here, what it means. So now I know that I need to go near your office and find something. So I actually did this exact search in Google, and Google was not only able to find me breweries, because we have 4 within like 5-minute walking distance of our office in Minneapolis, but not only that, it found it right near my office, even though I did not type in my address at all there. So there's that semantical side where it kind of understands not only what you're asking, but the semantics around it. Otherwise, all the different components of it and what it really means. What is a brewery? What is an office? What are those pieces there? And then it also understands the context. It's like I said, my office, so it must be coming from my office. So somehow, probably because I have my, allowed to know my location, it looked at my location and knew that that was my office, and it figured that out well. The other piece that machine learning really brings into this is how we understand synonyms and acronyms and kind of all the different pieces about the way we do it. Because this is another, on top of spelling, this is probably the other thing that trips up searches the most, is somebody will use a different word to describe the same thing, or if you're inside an organization, oftentimes we tend to have acronyms that we use for these things. And even inside some larger organizations, we have acronyms that one group uses for one thing, and the same acronym another group uses for another thing. So we have a lot of different connections and components there. And really what the machine learning side of this whole equation does is it helps parse that out and understand and extract meanings. And it doesn't mean that these systems have some huge meaning database somewhere, and there's not something out there that is like, grab the meaning of every word on the planet. It has some internal logic built into it, but overall, when it says machine learning, it's learning from your content and how you use these words that are being searched on, and it learns from the visitors that actually use the search and how they go through and doing that. And some will even learn from your analytics of how people actually navigate through your site. There's a lot of different pieces there that can play into that. And sometimes it's also about you working with a system and teaching it, so teaching it acronyms, teaching it synonyms and all that in there so that it can recognize that. So learning means that it's going to take it part of the way, but learning is also part of learning is teaching. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you're always just going to have the system do everything for you. It also means that you may have to do some educating of the system to actually help it understand. The difference is in this type of scenario is you don't necessarily always have to do that teaching one-to-one. You can teach more general concept, and it can understand how to extrapolate that concept and do something else. So the third area is probably an area you're a little bit less familiar with, and this is a concept of knowledge graph. So knowledge graph, the concept of knowledge graph has actually been around for a really, really long time. But the implementation is actually coming into our marketing vernacular, especially around the search space, is probably more like the last few years. I always think of, if you really want to understand knowledge graph, one of the ways that you can understand it is by really looking at knowledge graph is about how everything connects together in that. How everything connects together and how everything looks at one another. And I realize I actually, for some reason, didn't update the bullet points on there. Sorry, I must have missed it, that they had the same bullet points except for there. But overall, from here, I always think of it, years ago, there used to be this site out there that no longer exists that I used to love, that when I got done reading an author and I really liked that author's books, I'd go to this site and I'd type in the author name. And what it'd do is it'd create a matrix kind of similar to what you're seeing on the right hand of the screen there. But overall, this matrix would be a bunch of floating bubbles out there with all these interconnections. And you'd have your author in the middle, and then you'd see a bunch of other authors connected to them. And what this would do is it would talk about by the topics that your author, was it mystery, was it espionage, was it romance, drama, whatever it might be, type biographies, whatever type of content, how similar they were in writing prose and all these different things. And this was something somebody had built, but basically I could sit there and go through and I'd say, okay, so my favorite author was Nelson DeMille, and I would look at that, and connected to him was Lee Childs, and I'd connect over to Lee Childs, and Lee Childs would come in the middle, and then I'd see all the authors connected to him. And so I could actually use that to explore and actually find other authors that I might be interested in reading their books based on the authors that I had really enjoyed. So that really is knowledge graph. It's about taking all this different information and really bringing it together and actually disseminating it as one complete package. So now if you can look at the diagram here on the side, I could have a project for HighMonkey and it's got all these different connected pieces. Well, if I wanted to look at all of our projects that we did under consulting, I could then see all the related project managers, the architects, the developers, any related conversations to that project, those project types, any related services and all that kind of stuff. So then I could look at a particular project and I could see all these components. So it's really not about an individual piece of content, it's about how all that content works together. So what does that mean? Well, on an external website, knowledge graphs are going to take a while before they're really going to get there, except that when you think of it like an educational instance of this is, let's say that I have, some type of collegiate program such as an accounting degree. Well, what are all the pieces that are really connected into that accounting degree? We have the classes that are available. We have the department it's part of, the instructors that teach it. We have the degrees you can get out of it. We have the, maybe the certificates that go along with it, the buildings the classes are in, the campuses are offered. Is it online or is it in person? We have all these different connecting pieces. So imagine a search that you wouldn't have to sit there and build out these really complex displays to show this, but instead it could sit there and say, okay, you want to look at accounting? Well, here's all this information from all these different pieces, and here's how it all connects together. So you start getting this much more basis for having this information connected together there, and how your phrasing of your content and that kind of stuff. So another piece that's really been around for a really long time that is now getting kind of grouped into this artificial intelligence kind of conversation, but really has been its own thing for a long time, is auto classification. So where, frankly, on the public website, search engine side of things, we don't really hear this as much as we hear this on internal search initiatives, because obviously internal search initiatives, a lot of times, instead of hundreds or thousands of pieces of content, you're searching tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of millions of pieces of content. And overall, what the number one struggle is having some type of metadata strategy so that you can extract metadata from that content that's meaningful and will help people arrive, search better, or you're using it for your SEO or whatever it is. Well, another piece that has really gotten more and more refined throughout the years is this concept of auto classification. Otherwise, the system using machine learning to read through your content, understand it, and then actually pull out the topical pieces, connect them all together, and really start to build more of a metadata map for your digital website or entity or whatever it might be like that. And it really does that by chunking out the content, really trying to understand what's important, and then extracting those topics, your acronyms, all those kind of things, and putting them into some type of logical format. The piece that was missing from a lot of those systems back then, that is getting more and more, is that it was really hard to kind of see when that was happening, how it was connecting all these different pieces together. And one issue that we saw a lot, especially in earlier versions of auto classification systems, was we saw a lot of basically people or content having the same phrases on a lot of the different pages, and so all this content being basically tagged with the same information. And where that could seem ideal, overall, if you can't use a tag to narrow down a search from 1,000 and all you can narrow it down is to 998, that's not a very efficient tag. You need that to be these microcosms that understand that these are related concepts and how you do it. So the classification pieces have gotten better, but more so what we're seeing more in the search world is the administrative side, how you manage it, being able to merge these meta tags together, separating them apart, refine how it does it. That really is coming to a much stronger level that we're able as administrators to take care of that kind of stuff and do something there. And then the last one, kind of personalization, and what personalization really means to us as well. Personalized content is definitely nothing new, but you can see how kind of describing all these other pieces here, you can see how personalization is kind of coming more into this type of discussion. And that's why I say kind of artificial intelligence, when they use that, or AI, it's really become a junk term, because it's basically about taking all these things that do some type of knowledge on its own, or you teach it and put it all into one thing. Well, personalization has been around for, I can't even tell you how much. And we've got all these marketing suites and marketing automation systems that do all this stuff. But really bringing this into the search experience is also another big piece about knowing it. Again, I'll go back to that natural language processing one. When I said find a brewery near my office, it was able to understand not only because of my search history, because I have my Google profile there, but where my office was, what a brewery was, and it was able to personalize those results and find something near me. Now, if I did enough of it with the search, and I'm a huge guy on dark beer, so I like porters and browns and stouts the most, and I don't tend to like that light, fluffy beer. And so from that side, if it knew enough and I had done enough searches through Google, because I do have kids now, so I don't do as much searching of that probably as I did years ago, and then it would probably also know that it could probably also, if it had that built into it, could also recommend to me a brewery first that's near me that also happens to have a recommendation of a brand new stout that they just released. So this is all around personalization and an understanding. And there's a lot of ways this happens. I mean, obviously, most marketing automation systems rely on certain characteristics, otherwise maybe past history that you've went through, what sites you visited by actually looking through your site visiting history. With GDPR and all the things that are happening here with privacy, that's getting to be a much bigger thing. The same with demographics. So what we have to do more so is we are going to have to start investing in these technologies that can do this somewhat automatically and really kind of understand this based on the context of what we're doing, maybe our pattern at the moment, but be able to bring that history that we allow to be brought into the equation and not just naturally assume that we can bring all this together. So right here, when you start talking about which, I'm not sure how many of you on here would be considered, kind of more admins versus marketing folks, but I'm going to assume most of the marketing folks probably have done some type of persona development and things like that to kind of identify their people. So part of that is going to be really understanding and kind of influencing what type of personalization you think is really important. So again, going back to the educational scenario I just mentioned with knowledge graphs, if I'm studying for an accounting degree and the system actually knows that I'm studying for an accounting degree, and then I say, something like, I search on something like, what curriculum do I have left? It's going to extrapolate that it's talking about accounting degree. It might know from some other system that I am a junior, and it might extrapolate with the best knowledge of what classes typically are recommended for that. Now, obviously, that's kind of a major scenario and not something that's super simple, but overall, the point is this is where search is really starting to go and what we can do with that. So as always, with any type of new technology or new methodology of doing something, we always have some downsides to it. And so I wanted to make sure that you kind of understood that there are some definite pitfalls with a lot of this stuff, and we really need to consider those pitfalls and understand them. The first, from a practical standpoint, is no matter what any search engine vendor ever tells you anywhere, or any consultant ever tries to tell you, it's not all auto magic. There is still things you're going to have to do. And the reality is, and I'll probably say it in another slide, if you have crappy content, it probably doesn't matter how smart the system is, because the system's not going to be able to get past your crappy content. So you're going to still have to do something. The other thing is when you actually let these systems run wild and you let them go and rely on them, you're going to have to make sure you're also doing what I call CYA, covering your own ass. And the important part there is that we don't always have this stuff understood, and we don't know what it would do. So what happens if it starts pulling up a result you didn't want to have a result, or interpreting a word to mean something else there? If anybody has ever used swipe-based mobile text entry, you know exactly what I mean, where I'm typing in one word and all of a sudden it just assumes it's a completely different word. And not only does it assume it's a completely different word, it assumes that a word that, honestly, I've never typed in my entire life, nor ever planned to, and probably wouldn't want to set to the person that I'm typing the text to. So there is that piece of intelligence there, but that intelligence doesn't always get it right. And so probably the bigger thing for most organizations is you can't just install these systems and let them run. You actually have to know what you're doing, do something in it. Therefore, your skill sets are going to need to be reset. And this is going to be the time that if you don't already in your organization, you really need to start thinking about if you're going to make this type of investment, because none of these systems are cheap. If you're going to make this time a type of investment, you're actually going to have to think from the standpoint of getting either the right people in place or resetting your own skills to understand all the different pieces, because it's not just about turning these on and letting them go. It's about actually fundamentally understanding how they do what they do, to at least a decent level excuse me, so that you can participate in that process. Um, so that kind of brings us some of the philosophical things. Is the AI, might be smarter than you up front because you don't have the time and the effort, but is it smart enough? So there comes that slippery slope. If you just let it go, is it really going to be good enough for you, or are you going to do it? I've seen organizations implement some type of auto magical processing to end up understanding that it actually made things worse than better. So you always need to do it. And as I said, I was going to bring it up. Can your search intelligence really get around your crappy content? If you only have 3 words on a page, can it really understand that that's the most important page on earth? The same as if you have a page with 500 documents linked to it, is there a way that it will really understand that that's not the most important page you have on your site? So. And part of this probably fits a little bit more to internal searches, but overall, from the standpoint of just understanding, is one of the things is we've seen as kind of a pattern is that when people implement these systems and they get excited about them, and they start saying, "Oh, wouldn't it be nice if we also had this and this?" And so, what happens when everything really becomes everything, and there's just too much content out there? It still comes to the person being able to ask a question well. It still comes to the system needing to serve those up really well and everything in between. So I'm just going to give you a few thoughts here in closing of some of the ways that we can prepare for this. So if it is a path you're already moving down or thinking about moving down, what are some things that you can do kind of up front really to kind of know whether you're ready and really get yourself in the right place? Well, the first, and I probably already beat this too much, but you need to make sure your content is better. You have to realize that search fundamentally is about words, and the number of words on a page is going to do it. This is why a lot of times documents show up a lot more than page content, because in page content we're taught to create less content and clearer messages. In documents, the reason we throw things into documents in the first place is so we can go all willy-nilly and just do a lot of crazy things. So there is no surprise that it's still about word. Well, if that page with a little bit of content on it is the one that's more important, you're probably going to have to utilize some of your own skills to help manipulate, or we don't like to call it manipulate, we'll say tune the search results to better understand it. It still takes good metadata. You still need to have a good keyword strategy inside your organization. That's not just about getting #1 on Google. It's also about everything in between. Because one of the nice things that's been very beneficial, especially as search engines have kind of come into their own. Search has been around for a really long time, but it's really the last 5 or so years that we've found organizations talk about them a lot more. Is that they tend to, if you have a good practice for a Google, it's going to be the same good practice for internal search engines, which that's very beneficial because doing those things. But don't forget, one of Google's most important things now is about having good structured content, using good structural hierarchy, accessibility, compliance, and that. Well, a lot of the good search engines follow those same mantras. So if you don't have that stuff in place, you're not going to do it. And are you taking the time and effort to create and keep clean? So otherwise, are you moving out old content, moving in new content? Are you keeping things fresh and not letting your site get stale? Because that still has an effect. And that's why a lot of times, especially in internal scenarios, we see a lot of scenario or situations where people bring up really old content that nobody even knew still existed. So I kind of talked about this, but obviously if you're going to kind of fit into this whole knowledge network or kind of understanding scenario, you're going to have to understand your own semantics. You're going to have to understand the relationship with things. There are organizations, this tends to be a little bit easier than others. I find actually this is one nice thing about being a more governmental, educational, or really structured organizations. There tends to be a lot of understanding of relationships. Where a lot of organizations are not like that, there tends to be a lot more about you needing to go out, map it, really understand what you're doing there. But understanding those semantics, how information relates, is not only structurally sound for a website build, but also from the standpoint of opportunities that you have down the road. And then make sure your structure is good. I kind of already talked about this, but really kind of make sure that you have a good structure, because that's counting. Because no matter what, one of the factors in almost every search engine out there is, where it sits in your hierarchy. And if your hierarchy is very flat, that can be cool. But if you have thousands of flat file, it has no understanding of what's not important and what is. It's the same as like when you link everything off the homepage, a very good scenario in that sense, versus having a good structured hierarchy where the system itself can actually understand what is more and less important. And then, like I said at the very beginning, one of the biggest pain points is make sure your search strategy is really part of everything you do. Whether you're kicking off a new site, doing a new digital initiative, or you're creating a new website or redesigning an existing website, you really want to make sure that search is at the discussion at the beginning, at every part in the middle, and at the end. It's not that you have to implement search up front, it's that you need to make sure that that's part of that equation throughout the entire process, and you're really thinking about it. And you've really got to balance that business process against findability needs. So one of the things we see a lot with CMS implementations is that when you actually build out the CMS, it's really built based on what's going to make it easier for the editor to edit the pages. But what we find is that it tends to create either a really convoluted structure, a more rigid structure that doesn't really adjust to the ability to people to find things and do things. So really looking at that from the standpoint of what we're trying to accomplish from a findability standpoint, a lot of today's CMSs are now really starting to disconnect that CMS structure from your actual presentation, so we have a lot more opportunity to really serve up content in a more customer friendly way, yet give our administrators a more structured way to manage it in an easier one. Make sure you're planning your content, metadata, and structure up front. Hopefully everybody that is on this or listens to this recording in the future will all realize that one of the most important things is making sure that you have a good plan and that you stick to that plan and that you don't always convince yourself to change it. So the last thing I wanted to mention before I open it up to any questions or we wrap it up is, I'm sure people want to kind of talk about the tools. I really didn't feel good about promoting a single tool or a different tool. So I thought I'd share this. This was shared with me by a vendor not too long ago. It's the latest in what we call Insights Engine, Gartner Quadrant. That is probably the most appropriate fitting, similar natured to what we just talked about here. And you can kind of see it. And don't always discount that the leaders are the ones you can go, because there's a couple things you can say. Usually the leaders also are the most expensive, but also there's a lot of different talents. I mean, we have a lot of experience with Coveo, with Funnelback. We've obviously done a lot with Microsoft, and we've played with some of these others. And they all have their good aspects and their bad. That's why it's not just about choosing a tool. It's really about understanding what you're trying to accomplish, what you really want to get out of it, and then kind of seeing that tool that is not only going to match your needs now, but if anything, when I go to vendors and have a discussion, I want to know what they know now, but even more importantly, I want to see where they're going in the next 5 years and what's on their roadmap, because things are going to be very different in 5 years than they are today. So you really want to consider that it's some type of trendsetter and that they're moving in the direction that you think you see your own organization moving and the needs that you have around that. So thank you very much. Really appreciate everybody taking the time. Joel, I'm not sure if we have any questions. Actually, I'm going to say in this new...
None right now.
Yeah, but I'm open to any questions people might have from that side. All right, hearing none, I think I'll just let everybody go. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to email me at virgil@highmonkey.com to ask a question. We'll be putting up a blog post later this week to make sure that everybody can get access to the recording going forward. So thank you all very much.